You'll unmute yourself, Peter. There you go.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter. I'm an alcoholic, and 50 or 55 minutes. Wow. I don't remember who got a hold of me and got me going with all these groups around. It seems like every time one of you asks me, it gets longer. I thought it was 35 or 40, but I can go for an hour. I can talk about sobriety forever. And I'm from, I'm kind of zooming into y'all from Los Angeles. I grew up in the Boston area and have never spent a lot of time in between. I've lived on both coasts. And the reason I tell you that is if you are new here, and I'm noticing the numbers on this meeting just going up and up and up. It looks like we're over 160 now. So I'm assuming some of you are new in sobriety. If for some reason the sound of my voice or the look of my face is fingernails scratching on a chalkboard, that's absolutely okay. What I would just beg you to do, because that was the case for me. I got onto some meetings. It was all in person back then. I'm in my 10th year of sobriety. And some of the speakers just bothered me. I don't know what it was. But what they all said and what I was so grateful for is they said, if you don't like me, just keep coming until you find a speaker that you do like. So I'm hoping that I'll say something that all of you might be able to benefit from and might give you a stronger connection with a power greater than yourself that can get and keep you sober if you're struggling with that now, or if you've been around for a while. I hope I might be able to say something that will get you closer to a higher power so you can be more freed up to do the will of that higher power as you understand it. And if you've identified as an alcoholic and you subscribe to the big book, what that means to you is the same as what it means to me. I want all the clutter cleared out of my heart, soul, and mind so that I can be of more service to other alcoholics. It's certainly, I have not always been able to sing that little song as eloquently as I just did. I was born in the 1966. I'm 54 years old in Boston, Massachusetts. Both of my parents were school teachers. They worked very hard. They taught summer school. My mom sold real estate. My dad did little side businesses. They did everything they could to get us into the upper middle class neighborhood, upper middle class town that normally two school teachers probably wouldn't be able to afford, certainly not without a struggle. They were wonderful people. They cared deeply about my sister and I. My mom died about 25 years ago. My guess is she probably would have benefited from becoming part of our group, but I certainly can't tell you any, horrific stories about, vicious abuse or any of those types of things. I grew up in a great family. I grew up in a great home. They gave me every opportunity. My dad was a teacher at my high school. Accomplishment was stressed in my family and in the town that I grew up in. I was a very good student. I was a great athlete. I graduated from high school and went off to an Ivy League college and did very well there as well. On the outside, from the time I was a very young person, now having said all that, I come from an East Coast Irish Catholic on one side and Scottish non-denominational, kind of maybe a little bit Protestant Lutheran on the other side. It was certainly a social drinking culture, and there certainly is alcoholism in my family. But I don't have the horrific story of it was the worst thing ever growing up in my house. It absolutely wasn't. There was what I felt to be pressure to excel and accomplish things. But I would describe that as what, good parents, certainly back in that time in the 70s and 80s did. Work hard, get good grades, be a good human being, live by the rules, get a good job, buy a house, save money, have a good life. I can't find anything wrong with that would say I would at some point in my life make a decision to try to put so many chemicals in my body that I would expire. None of that happened in my childhood. Did I agree with everything they did? No, I didn't. Was it awful? Absolutely not. I remember when I was in 1976, when I was in the 5th grade, we moved from a city called Lynn to a town called Linfield. That was kind of moving from the blue collar, small city outside of Boston to the upper middle class suburban town that was a little bit more affluent. That was a very difficult transition for me. And I remember right about that time starting to feel different. I remember getting picked on by kids in the new school. I remember going into the liquor cabinet in junior high school and stealing a little bit and pouring water in to get the level up because I just wanted to feel a little bit better when I went to junior high school. That's how it started for me. I was a daily pot smoker by the time I got to college, but I went to Cornell University. I graduated in 1988. I got good grades. I had a good social life. The deal with my parents was they wanted me to get, and here's where the alcoholism started to kick in. They wanted me to get an Ivy League degree and go off to corporate America and get a really good job. I wasn't on board with that corporate America stuff. So I got them the degree and I went up to Rutland, Vermont to Killington ski area and became a bartender in a ski bum. And that's about when I started to, in retrospect, as I look at my story, that's when I start to see the defiance start to kick in. Even if it's good guidance, I'm not going to take it. You want me to get a good job and get secure for a little bit after college? I think I'm going to go take enormous risks. That's where that wiring was. The drinking and drugs still hadn't gotten too bad yet, but the defiance was there. Anyways, I went to Rutland, Vermont. I was a ski bum there. Had a lot of fun doing that. I was a bartender. One day, one of my customers at the bar asked me if I wanted to help him with his books at a video production company. So I said, sure, and he paid me a couple $100 a week, and I started balancing his checkbook at this little video production company. I noticed that there were some opportunities there to do some television commercial work and maybe sell a little bit more of that than they were doing. So I made a little trifold brochure, your commercial, on time, on budget, or it's free. And then I went all around rural New England to any cable company I could find. I met all the sales reps. I went to the car dealers, the furniture dealers, the insurance companies, and I handed them this brochure and I said, we're going to make your television commercials. They're going to be on time, on budget, or they're free. And here's another, sort of example of the alcoholic behaving in alcoholic ways before the alcoholic gets too bad. I had no idea how to make television commercials, but I went out and sold a whole boatload of them, and I figured it out later, which I've learned is very, very alcoholic thinking. So in short order, 2 kids, I was 23, he was 21. We went from $0 to $40,000 a month in sales at this little production company in 1989. So you can imagine what a couple of kids in ski country with that kind of money sloshing around would do. And the drinking started to get worse during that time. It became daily at that point. At some time in the first couple of years while we were doing that, my partner came to me and said, I want to make movies, and I didn't know any better. So I said, okay, we'll do that. I talked my father, the school teacher, into mortgaging his house to give us money to make a movie. David, my partner, also talked his father into doing that. And for me, my story is that compulsive, addictive behaviors, I ran through all of them before I finally settled on drugs and alcohol and torched my life. So got my dad to mortgage his house. David got his dad to mortgage one of his properties. He was a real estate developer. We get into this film. It ended up costing more than we thought it was going to cost. It took us 3.5 years to get it finished. So what I did to pay back my dad is I worked making television commercials during the day, Monday through Friday. On the weekends, we made the film. And 7 days a week for 3.5 years, I waited tables to pay my dad back. No days off. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. So in hindsight, what I can see is that's when that broken thinking that I have as an alcoholic started. At some point during that process, I called a woman that I'd met briefly in college and to see how she was doing. She wasn't feeling all that well, suffered from some injuries. I invited her to come out to Vermont. She got there. She never left. 4 months later, we found out we were pregnant, and I married her. That's another kind of, all the clues were there. I just never saw them, right? That's like classic alcoholic behavior. Hi there, let's get married. It's just, I'm not going to think about consequences. I'm just going to do it because it feels good in the moment. So we made 4 independently financed films, and then I got a call from HBO, and I started doing low-budget television movies in the early 90s. I also, at that point, I started having some physical pain because I was a compulsive exerciser as well. And my now wife at the time, we had a child, Lillian, and Christy, my wife at the time, was getting into chronic pain. She was in chronic pain, and she would use Vicodin, Percocet, oxycodone, that kind of stuff, and I would steal pills every once in a while. Then the double life started. By this time, I was a daily drinker, and we built a 40,000 square foot studio space in Vermont. I was commuting back and forth to Los Angeles because that's where my executives were. I started taking Christy, my wife at the time, to Los Angeles. She would route our trips through San Francisco and then back home so that I would fall in love with San Francisco. So by the time I was 30, we had a house in Vermont, a house in just outside of San Francisco, a little condo. Then I had an office, and we bought a starter home in Burbank. So all of you who have diagnosed your alcoholism know, I mean, that is just fertile ground for the alcoholic double life. But I take everything a little bit too far, so I went for the triple life. I had my life in Vermont where I made the movies. I had my life in San Francisco where I pretended to be a family man, and then I had my life in Los Angeles where I kind of played the part of the hip, slick, and cool movie producer. And this is a mixed meeting, and it's recorded. I'll let you connect the dots between what I was doing during the day and what I was doing at night in the business that I was in. If you've seen any of the television shows or movies about, satires about movie producers, you can generally fill in the dots as to some of the things that I was doing that a married man certainly should not be doing. So that was about the mid to late 90s. By the time I was 35 or so, I'd written and produced 23 television movies. My typical workday when I was in Vermont, I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I would call my key team into the production office. I would have meetings with them until 10 o'clock in the morning. I would get on a bicycle and ride over 6 mountains in Vermont, about 70 miles. I would come back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, work till midnight, drink for a couple hours, and do that again 7 days a week. So I am just a 0 to 100 guy until all of the wheels fall off. That lifestyle started to break down for me. Then I went home from a movie at one point to our house in Burbank, and the relationship that I developed with my wife, although it looked very good on the outside, was that I would go off and try to conquer the world and do what I did when I was away. And then when I came home, her role was pretty much to kind of take care of me and nurse me back to health when I needed my diaper changed, and then I would go back out and do my thing. She very much was my higher power in many ways. I came home one time in 2004, and she said, "My head hurts so much, I want to kill myself." And I knew at that moment that my life had changed, that I needed to now shift my way of living from me doing whatever I wanted in my career and providing enough financial resources for the family to not get too much flack about that, to completely changing my lifestyle and giving her the support that I'd withheld from her pretty much the whole time that we were married. Although up to that point, my memory is the marriage was a pretty happy one. So when it came time to support another person in what they were going through, I realized, I can see now that I was completely unequipped. So that was about 2004 when that started. By the time I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in 2011, it was all gone. The business in Vermont was gone. The place in San Francisco was gone. The place we were living in Burbank had been repossessed by the bank. I had no money. I was, I don't know if you can see me, but I weigh about 165 pounds now. I'm 5 feet 10 inches tall. I was at 117 pounds. I was never home. I was drinking around the clock. So Christy asked me to leave, which I did gladly. I basically abandoned both of my children. My oldest at that time was 15 years old. My youngest was 4. Christy was in chronic pain and was fighting to hold things together with the 2 girls and keep her health together. I withheld money from them. I withheld any kind of nurturing from my daughters. I was emotional and verbally abusive and abusive in text and email to my wife at the time. I threatened her. I got arrested 3 times. I got a 5150. I had restraining orders against me from the judge. By the time I got to my home group, all I had left was a shoulder bag, 117 pounds, and they had paid 2 weeks of rent at a home for sober or, maybe not sober folks not too far from where I live. And that started a year of me going in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, the reason I told you about the way I was raised is I don't fit the profile of a guy who in his late 30s, early 40s is going to become an abusive father who abandons his children, tortures their mother, and can't stop getting arrested. That was not my life plan. That was not my life plan. I'm a highly intelligent guy. I'm very eloquent. I'm very compelling. I'm a good salesperson. I know how to put deals together in business. I can create money. I'm a great leader. I can lead teams of people, get them organized and focused into the accomplishment of a worthy goal. And all of those skills were completely useless when it came to trying to overcome an addiction to drugs and alcohol, or alcoholism, as the big book calls it. In fact, what I learned in the year between when I came to AA and then actually got sober, and I'll get to that in a little bit, is that so-called intelligence that I think I have, all of that self-will I use to create so-called success in the outer world, that actually worked against me as I tried to get sober. All that delusion that I'd created, that me on my own power was a good idea and could create results, the deeper I bought into that, the harder it was to stop drinking and using, in my case, using drugs. So for the first year in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would come into AA meetings and I would kind of stay sober or stay dry for a little while off of the feelings of the fellowship. So I'd go into a meeting. There was a lot of positive energy. You can do it. Don't worry. We love you here. We're going to love you until you love yourself. Fantastic. And I'd hear something from a speaker like me, some phrase, and it would change my life, and I would feel good because physically I would be better, and I'd get a little bit of work, and there'd be a couple of bucks in the bank, and I'd say, there's no way I'm going to get drunk again. And then the next thing I know, a text would come in from my ex-wife, or try to connect with my kids, and they would say no, or fill in the blank, and I would wake up in jail again. And I couldn't understand how that could keep happening. So this kept going for a little while. The judge was really getting sick of me. The judge dialed me all the way back to supervised visits. And I don't remember exactly what it was called, but I think it was called medically supervised visits. So the supervisor had to have a few degrees to be able to supervise me with my 4-year-old, or 5-year-old at the time. My 15-year-old Lily didn't want anything to do with me. So the judge says, I'm going to give you 10 or 12 supervised visits with this one counselor in your county, and let's see how you're doing after that. And by the way, this is kind of sort of your last chance I've had. Those supervised visits were $100 a week, and I had no driver's license, no car, and no money. It was everything I could do to get to these visits, but somehow I got to the first one with this $100, and I gave it to the guy, and I sat down, and they had this kind of maze where, mom brings child into a holding room, and then dad goes in, and then child goes in, and then so the mom and dad never actually have to have any contact. So Ruby, who was 5 years old at the time, came in with a little ceramic cat that she painted in kindergarten or first grade, whatever she was in. She painted little whiskers on it, and she plunked it down on the table in front of me and sat there. And that was, we all have the moment, right? That was the moment. And it's funny because the DUIs weren't the moment. I got a DUI on the way home from divorce court. And that one was, I got OR'd, I got released on my own recognizance, and I drank as soon as I got home. I got 5150, I drank as soon as I got out. I got my family, or Christy's family, actually sent me to a luxury rehab down in Orange County for a couple of weeks, and I drank on the way home. I got arrested again. I drank as soon as I got out. I can't, if you're new here, my experience was I had a moment where the light went on and I said, the problem's me and I've got to change. And that's all I knew at that point. And what I realized while I was in that therapy session was that I had no idea how to play with this little girl. I had no idea at all how to play with this little girl. So the therapist brought over some games and we went through it. And I was still taking some pain meds at the time and some antidepressants, and the sober living that I was in was handing those out. So I found a way to stay dry from alcohol for about 4 or 5 months, but I was still taking some of the pills. And I apologize if this is a hardcore just alcohol meeting. I'll just use the word alcohol moving forward. Pills are a little bit of my story. I don't mean to disrespect it at all. So I kind of stayed dry for about 5 months. I was working in this little office as a freelancer. And about 5 months into that so-called sobriety run, I was on the telephone and I had a nasty taste in my mouth, and I had some Listerine in the office because I was wearing braces at the time. I'd lost some teeth and I was getting some of that repaired. And I put some Listerine in my mouth and I swished it around, and then I swallowed it by accident. Excuse me. And it had that same feeling in the back of my throat that alcohol had. And I remember having enough AA in me, because I'd been going to AA meetings every day, to say, well, I can't drink alcohol, but I'm really, really miserable because I know I'm never going to be able to drink again. And I hate myself and I hate my life. And so maybe if I just drink this Listerine, I can feel just a little bit better, and it will poison me to death and I'll die. So what I've learned since, and I'll get into the solution here in a little bit, is that that's the disease of alcoholism. That's the spiritual malady and the mental illness that twists my thinking and tells me a story before I get the solution that you all gave me that I actually believe. So my best thinking at that point was to sip Listerine until it poisoned me and I died. And I truly believed that that was a good plan. On day 3 of that experience, if anybody is thinking about drinking Listerine, by the way, that was 10 years ago, and I still have a little bit of burning right here. Don't do it. It's a horrible experience. It's not good. But anyway, I did that for 3 days. And then, you probably many of you have had this experience too. The word for them here in California is Eskimos. There was a guy in my home group, and I went to meetings every day that year. Even when I'd show up to meetings drunk, I'd pass out in meetings, I'd take dirty chips. I was just the guy that got them off the floor. But I got this 5 months together, and there was this one guy named Eric who would share every single day. And he was the guy who felt like my fingernails scratching on the chalkboard. He was all about it. This guy was all about it. He'd gone all the way down to homelessness, just like me, got into the rooms, the light went on, got a sponsor, went through the steps, into the fellowship, sponsored a ton of guys. His life had completely exploded. And what I know now is a lot of his shares were for my benefit. And I didn't know that at the time. So I couldn't stand this guy, but I had his phone number. And when I was drinking on day 3, this Listerine thing, the thought popped into my head, I think I'm going to call Eric. So Eric at the time was starting a new business and was very, very busy. I called him at about 2:00 in the afternoon, and he picked up on the first ring. I was kind of surprised. He said, how's it going? I said, well, I've been drinking Listerine for 3 days, and I don't know what to do. And I see some folks here that I'm sure are old timers on my screen who have all gotten some form of this call. And the first words out of his mouth are a variation of what you all said. He said, Peter, it's actually all going to be okay. And and I don't know what it is, and I see a lot of heads nodding on my screen. When we're at that very, very low point and we get on the phone with that person we know gets it, and in my case, and he says that, I believed him. I don't know what it was, but he led with that. It's going to be okay. And then he asked a lot of questions about the Listerine. How much are you drinking? How often? And he was worried about getting me to the hospital. So he figured out that I probably was going to be okay medically. He said, here's what I want you to do. Stop drinking the Listerine. Show up at Visions tomorrow. That's our home group. Sit next to me. Raise your hand and identify as a newcomer. And then after the meeting, ask Dave, who was his sponsor, to sponsor you. Do you think you can do that? And I said, yes, I do. So I managed to put the Listerine down that night. I showed up the next morning. They asked for newcomers. I raised my hand and I identified as a newcomer. And after I did that, I had a buddy over, and he sat to my right. I was in the same chair every day. And he whispered, his name was Sean. He had about 30 years at the time, maybe not quite that much, 25. He said, Peter. I said, what? He said, did you drink? And I said, yes. And the color drained out of his face. And this guy's been around AA every day for 25 years. I said, that's kind of interesting. And then I looked over to the other side, and this woman, Trish Gaines, who had about 10 years at that time, looked over at me and started to cry. And if you're new here, you may have the same thing I had when I was new. I actually thought that alcohol could kill all those people in the room, but I didn't really think it was going to kill me. And that was the moment when I just been around AA long enough where enough had seeped in, and I had enough of a clear head. I looked over, I said, these two have been at this a long time, and they think I'm going to die. Maybe this is real. Maybe there really is something wrong with me. So I went over to see this guy, Dave, and I don't know what y'all's feelings are on sponsorship. Dave was the guy that took all of us who needed to be spoken to in ways that perhaps are not completely loving and tolerant all the time. He was a real direct communicator and was not at all concerned about my feelings, but cared deeply about my sobriety. So he said, we're going to go through the steps, and I have some things that I need you to agree to, and I know you're going to tell me that you're going to agree to them, but you're probably going to fall off the beam with these agreements at some point, and I'm going to use them to help you make a decision to get back on the beam, because I'm a human power and I can't save you. He said, are you willing to do the steps, work through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous like your life depends on it? Absolutely. Are you willing to follow all of my direction, assuming it comes out of the big book? Anything else you can ignore? Yes. And then the last one, are you willing to do for others what I'm about to do for you? And I said, sure, absolutely. So we went through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous exactly as they're outlined in the book. And I went at that with the passion of a dying man. And what I came to was that if this isn't going to work, if this book and these steps don't work, then I'm going to find that out beyond any shadow of a doubt by giving 120% to everything in that book and everything he tells me to do, which is what I did. He had to speak to me one time. He suggested to me that I share in a meeting, and I didn't raise my hand and share. And he gave me a talking to about that. And that was it while we were going through the steps. There are a lot more conversations after I got sober and learned that drugs and alcohol really were not my problem, that it was a spiritual malady and a mental illness that was my problem, and a lot of the behaviors that I exhibited after I got sober shocked me, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So I went through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the way I found myself working to the inside of my home group was I always kind of feel the energy of the home group, but I didn't really understand what the secret was. And I learned what the secret was when I went through the steps. The steps in my experience were experiential. I couldn't get them by listening to other people talk about them. And a lot of what I try to do when I share my experience, strength, and hope is just encourage you, if you're new, if you don't have a sponsor and you haven't been through the steps out of the big books of Alcoholics Anonymous, to just go ahead and do what I did. Because as eloquent and descriptive as I am, I cannot describe to you what it's like to have that experience. So as I was going through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time under the direction of a sponsor right out of that big book, the fires of a recently sober alcoholic were burning all around me. My wife was now an ex-wife. The judge still was not very happy with me. Neither one of my kids wanted anything to do with me. I had financial pressures. I had legal problems, you name it. And so I would come to my sponsor with some of that stuff in the morning, and he would say, you know, Peter, he let me talk for a couple minutes, and then he'd say, you know, I can't make a whole heck of a lot of sense out of the insanity that your life has become, but here's what I can guarantee you. If you go through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous right out of the book, just like I did, and then you dedicate, and then you make your first priority God, AA, and helping other guys go through the steps, I promise you, I can't tell you when, but I can tell you that all of those problems will get resolved. And I remember saying to myself, this guy's got to check his sobriety date. There's no way. How could reading a book with somebody, praying, writing down all the bad stuff I've done, all the people I hate and what my part in that is, and then sitting down with the folks I've harmed and expressing that honestly, and then having a sincere desire to fix those problems, how can that possibly get me out of the financial hole that I'm in? How can that possibly stop her from hating me? How can that possibly get my kids to ever trust me again after all that I've done with them? That makes absolutely no sense. So those of you who have been around for a while know how that story ends, right? And we'll get to that when we. What time is 55 minutes, Stephen? It's 5:39. What time do you want me to stop?
You got another, what time is it? You got at least 15 more minutes.
Another 15. Okay, so I'm going through the steps. I'm going to court. I'm going to DUI school. I have no money. I can't pay my rent. I rarely have food, but I did everything he told me to do. Okay, I got through the steps in 60 days. My sponsor opened a rehab at the time. He brings me over to the rehab. He said, see those 6 guys over there? I want you to get all 3 of those guys through the steps in 60 days. And we've got a step meeting. You're going to lead the step meeting. And it was crazy. My wife at the time has to have a surgery. I've got maybe 4 months. No car, no driver's license, no money. Child Protective Services is what they call it here in California. They were keeping a very close eye on me and her because she was headed down the same road that I went down at the time. And they said, we don't want her late for school once. We don't want her missing a single extracurricular activity, and we're going to come in and check in on you. At this time, I'd gotten together enough money to rent a 2-bedroom apartment with a friend of mine. He had a mattress in one room. He was newly sober. I had a mattress in another room, and we had 2 chairs and a table in the kitchen. So when Child Protective Services came, where's she sleeping and where's the food? And I'd have to spend $20 to make sure there was food in those cabinets when they came and checked. So here we go. Now all of a sudden I get the call, you're going to need to take her full time. I have to go get a surgery. My sponsor said, you need to be at the 7 o'clock meeting every day, no matter what. And you have to continue to sponsor these guys if you want a chance at staying sober. I was like, dude, you're out of your mind. But I got on the Yes Sir program. Okay, I'll do it. I'd seen the track record this guy had with low bottom guys like me who supposedly were smart and had success in a previous life. They did everything he said. They had great lives, so I did it. It was either 6 or 8 weeks. It was a long time. I can't remember when. Ruby and I would get up at 6. I'd get her ready for school, give her breakfast. There weren't any Ubers back then, so I'd call a taxi. We'd put the car seat in the back of the taxi. The taxi would take us to Visions. We'd get off at Visions. I'd sit on the floor Indian style. She would take a nap in my lap. I would share every morning about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now so I can inspire young guys to get sober. At 8 o'clock, we'd get up and somebody from the meeting would have the car waiting outside. We'd put the car seat in the back. We'd be at her school by 8:15, and then somebody else would volunteer to pick her up. About a weekend, the taxi driver said, I noticed you're going to the AA hall with your daughter every morning. I've been sober for 32 years. How about I just take you? You don't have to pay anymore. That was a big deal. That was grocery money. So for 8 weeks, because of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, we never missed. We never missed. And all of a sudden, now this is not me. If you're new here, I don't have a better word for it than God. This is a low bottom, hope to die, abusive, neglectful drunk who abandons children and tortures women emotionally. I never laid a hand on her. I would have if I kept going. It's not that I'm such a great guy. She took the right steps before I got there. And the Fellowship of AA came in and said, not only are we going to help you, we're going to show you how to be a father. And the way you be a father, it takes a lot for children, for daughters especially, to stop loving a father. But I definitely had lost their trust, and I definitely had lost their respect. And what happened was, as we went through all this, and people just kind of sort of started to notice all the work that I was doing in AA, and my older daughter and my ex-wife would start to say, it really seems like something has changed in you. And my sister, the gift I gave my sister, she never stopped loving me either, but stopped trusting and respecting me. The gift I gave her 10 years ago was not to show up at her wedding. You stay there and take care of yourself. We agreed that my dad, my mom had died a long time ago, and we had to start, the estate planning had happened. He was 70 or so. We agreed that I should not be part of his estate. So all kinds of mechanisms were put into his estate plan so that we could circumvent me and get whatever resources were left to my children because the divorce wasn't settled and I had IRS problems and all that stuff. But slowly, a little bit at a time, I started to notice that life was getting better and I was feeling better. And I had something internally called meaning and purpose. I started to, that thing I never had. Right? When I was in high school and I was getting good grades and and drinking on the weekends and being captain of sports and getting the prettiest girl. I just never quite felt right. And when I was in college doing the Ivy League thing, I knew I didn't belong there. And when I was in the movie business, being a crazy man, I knew that was going to come to an end. I was like, I can't sustain this forever. The covers are going to get pulled. I never, ever knew where I belonged in life. And as a result of that, I just ran so fast. And I realized right about the year mark or the year and a half mark, wait a minute, I know what my purpose is. I couldn't wait for the next young guy to call me for help. I couldn't wait for the rehabs to call me to come and talk to a young guy. I couldn't wait to get to we call them step studies, but they're really big book studies where we do one step a week. I couldn't wait. I put praying ahead of everything. I did it every morning. I put sponsoring guys ahead of work. I put it ahead of everything except for where I had to get Ruby. We designed, I started to get very transparent about who I was and what I was doing. I let Ruby's teachers and the administrators at her school and anybody we'd come into contact with, her parents, friends. I'm an alcoholic and I'm in recovery and it's my number one priority. And Ruby and I have designed a life so that I can stay sober and help other people stay sober. And at 6 years old, the neighbors would keep an eye on Ruby and she would get herself ready for school while I was at the meeting. I had my license back because she was sick of going to the meeting every morning. So the neighbors would make sure that she was okay. And I would come back to the apartment at that time at 8 o'clock and then get her off to school. Then she'd go to her mom's. And then I got a career job and I started to travel a little bit. And the ladies of AA, the young ladies of AA came in and helped. And I had nannies for a few years. And Chrissy's mom started to suffer from health problems, physical health problems at first, and then emotional health problems. And then my observation from the outside is perhaps some of the problems that those of us here in this room start to suffer from too. Ruby was about 10 years old. It was about 5 years ago now. And I came home one day and she said, Dad, it's time. And I said, time for what? And she said, it's time for me to live with you full time. And all of you who have been sober for a while have had these God moments. I just don't know a better word for it. When the truth is spoken to you or spoken to me. And what I've learned is the truth doesn't need to be defended and never can be argued against. And I'd seen the signs that things weren't great at her mom's house. And I knew she was right. And so we got an emergency order the next day from a friend in AA who was a lawyer. And 3 days later, we stood in front of the judge and the judge said, we're going to have you go talk to the mediator and then you'll come back. But in the meantime, I'm going to grant the temporary order with that. What that means is that the same judge who took all of my parenting rights away, with the exception of 1 hour, strictly supervised by a medical professional, now said, you have my complete confidence with this 10-year-old child for 3 weeks. I was like, wow, isn't that something? And there've been a lot of court stuff in between then where the Fellowship of AA, rose again and again and again with letters and testimony and, accompanying me to court and all that kind of stuff. So 3 weeks later, we had gotten our case together. We went to see the mediator and Ruby's mom and I went in and spoke with the mediator for a little while. And then Ruby went in and spoke to the mediator alone. And then Ruby's mom and I went back in to see the mediator and the mediator said, the mediation sessions are over. I've spoken to Ruby and she has let me know under no uncertain terms what my recommendation needs to be. Mom, Ruby wants you to go down the same path that Dad has gone down. And until you're willing to do that, she wants nothing to do with you at all. And based on what she's told me has happened in your household, I'm going to support that and make the recommendation to the court that 100% legal and physical custody be given to Dad. So, that's not possible. It's just not possible to get from point A, homeless, penniless, in a seedy, sober living, continually going to jail with everything gone, friends gone, home gone, family gone, money gone, dignity gone, to the person who's in charge of making sure children are safe, saying, you have my complete confidence. So a few days later, we go in and see the judge. And I've never been in a courtroom when a convict has been convicted to life, but I've actually heard some stories because I'm sure most of you have been around long enough, have folks that you know who have, because of things they've done when they were, under the influence of alcohol, been put away for a long time. And I know those folks. And what I've heard from friends who have been in those courtrooms is that when the judge is going to do that, they put that person at last in the docket. And when that final decision starts, it feels like the air gets sucked out of the room. So my lawyer and I walked into the courtroom 4 or 5 years ago at this point, and and my last name is Beckwith. It's a B. We should be first or close to first on the docket. And the judge looked up and said, "I'm going to move Beckwith to the end of the docket." And I said, "Excuse my language, ladies. Holy shit. This is going to happen." So she clears out all the other cases and then gives Ruby's mom a chance to make a case for to maintain some custody. And what Christy went, and Christy and I are fine now. I love her dearly, and I do everything I can to be helpful to her. I still take care of her financially. But Christy really hammered home at, my daughter is surrounded by alcoholics and drug addicts, and they take care of her. Because my community was all sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the judge looked at her and said, "I have absolutely no concerns at all, and I have full faith in Dad's judgment as to how Ruby should be taken care of and who should be taking care of her. And we're not going to revisit that point again." And then a little bit later, she ruled and gave me full legal and physical custody of Ruby, and we've been kind of a team ever since. So if you're new here in Alcoholics Anonymous, or if you've been around for a while and maybe your miracle has gotten a little bit stale, mine never has. Ruby and I pray together every morning on our knees out loud in my room. We talk about what we're struggling with, and we ask God for help to give us clarity and the strength to do the right thing. Ruby is struggling right now. She rides horses, and she's got some big decisions about if she's going to take her mom's horse over because her mom's struggling with the horse and how that's all going to work out. And I came home at lunch to say hello to her today, and she said, "Dad, God's not going to solve these problems for me. God's going to give me the strength to take action, and I think I've got clarity, and it's time to take some action, and here's my plan." She's 15. This is a kid who had 23 of 24 teeth rotting out of her head when I first picked her up for her first supervised visit. It really gotten bad with her mom and I. She couldn't look anybody in the eye. She got picked on and bullied at school. Today, she's a straight A student at the most exclusive private school in the greater LA area, or one of the most exclusive schools. She rides a horse. She does very well in soccer. She's got a vibrant social life, and she has a God in her life. And she has a dad who's far from perfect. She wants all of you to know that when I tell the story, right, is that she's not perfect and I'm not perfect. But what we are is committed to my sobriety and to a better life. And what happened for me is the first 5 years of my sobriety, I kept waiting. When's this single dad going to come along? I want the other single dad. I'm the guy that got the single dad miracle. And I got all these kids, these young men in rehab. So in case you can't tell, I'm a pretty direct communicator. I'm very intense, and I'm pretty difficult to get off course when I get focused. I grew up in a very disciplined East Coast family. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Do your homework, get A's, get to bed by 11 o'clock, get up by 7, and do it again tomorrow, which is a fantastic skill set when you're trying to get sober, when you're ready to point that stuff, doing that stuff. We also don't take any bullshit up in Boston. You say it the way it is up there. So these kids kept coming to me over and over again. I only ever did 2 foxhole prayers in my life, and it was when my 2 children were born. I said, "God, please no boys, because I don't want anybody but me." So for 5 years, I sponsored young men who were all young enough to be my son. And then at the 5-year mark, and I don't have time to tell you this story, but it's another miracle, a young man sat down next to me and said, "I've been watching you for 8 years. I've been trying to get sober. I have a daughter, and I want to do what you've done with Ruby." And I said, "How long has it been since you've seen your daughter?" And he said, 3 years. And that was when I was about 5 years sober. And what I said to him was, "That's disgusting." And he said, "Isn't that horrible what she's doing to me?" And I said, No. You are disgusting. You are disgusting, just like I was. And that's when it all came together of, oh, that's what he was getting me ready for. I had the credibility to be able to talk like that to a young man because I'd gone down that path. And what I said to him after that is, it's not the core of your being that's disgusting. It's the disease that's caused you to behave like a disgusting man who abandons children. And the reason you're sitting next to me is because I did the same thing and you saw me turn it around. And now you're going to do the exact same thing that I did, which he has. And that was the beginning of a whole bunch of guys who, one at a time, came up to me in quiet. There's about 10 of them that I work with now who have all said, I haven't seen my child in fill in the blank. So if you're new here in Alcoholics Anonymous and my time's almost up, or if you've been here for a while, my experience has been that I know that more and more freedom and beauty and abundance and prosperity and peace and harmony is right around the corner. I just don't know which corner. It's never ended for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. My life has never gotten better. I believe it can't get any better. I have a head that tells me it can't get any better, but I have 10 years of experience that tells me if I keep doing what I've been taught to do, which is to get closer and closer to a God of my understanding that can show me right from wrong and give me the power to do right instead of wrong, that I can expect great things to happen and share those great things with you and inspire you guys to get sober and do what I did or even better. So if you're new here in AA, same thing I said at the beginning. If that talk just turned you inside out and you hated every word, I get it, ignore it, come back. The next guy's going to light your fire. If I said something that helped you, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me here, Stephen. I don't know who told you to get me, but thanks to that person too. And I'm just so grateful to be part of Alcoholics Anonymous and part of this wonderful fellowship and to have a God that has shown me what my purpose in life is, which is to pass on the gift that was so freely given to me. So thanks for letting me share.